to my dearest friends, I am honored to welcome you back once more for another exploration into the grim darkness of the far future. As it so stands today, the stars themselves have been cleaved in twain, with their fading light being condemned to illuminate only a galaxy filled to the brim with horror and war. In this time of ending, none save for the lost and the damned will ever truly know peace. Should a humble imperial citizen dare to raise their eyes, only to stare into the cold, uncaring abyss above, they would surely spy the near-endless hosts of aliens, mutants and heretics who wouldn't hesitate to fall upon the decaying Imperium simply to tear it asunder with tooth and claw. But through this eternal night, there remains a silent, vengeful force who stand as the unyielding bastion to all mankind, safeguarding humanity, even during its darkest hour. I would, of course, be referring to the fearless chapters of the Space Marines, who have been stationed across the galaxy, only to stand vigil in that boundless void, ever prepared to respond to the calls of war and to bring the fury of all mankind to their many enemies. There are thought to be around 1,000 chapters, each of which will contain around 1,000 Marines. But despite their strength, their members were never intended to be immortal. Time and time again, a Marine will fall as a martyr to the Imperium, with their noble deeds and heroic exploits now to be committed to forever live on in the many murals and songs of the chapter. Yet no reverence can erase the truth, in that a brother has been lost. But there can be no rest for the Marines, and so the chapter will demand for another to stand in their place, and a new recruit will be called upon to rise as a true-born member of the Adeptus Astartes. This ascension, however, is not easily earned. To reforge a pathetic human into a bioengineered super soldier will necessitate the recruit to endure a grueling, near-decade-long procedure which will either elevate or obliterate the aspirant. But this, my dearest friends, is exactly what we shall be discussing today. We will begin by looking over the recruitment practices of the Astartes, since it will only be from the finest of aspirants who hold the potential to survive the coming ordeal. After, we will follow a recruit as they are implanted with the sacred gene seed of the chapter, which will not only lead to the development of several specialized organs, but will also introduce the blood of a progenital primarch into their veins. Alongside this transformation, they will undergo a relentless training regime designed to test their mind, spirit, and loyalty to the absolute breaking point. Only after surviving these trials will the aspirant stand armored and remade as a true battle brother of the Adeptus Astartes. With all this in mind, I do believe that it is time for us to begin. We are to now walk amidst the halls of the fortress monasteries of the Adeptus Astartes to learn of the many secret methods behind creating a space marine. In an ancient and bygone age, long before the Imperium of Man first took form, the Emperor had emerged upon holy terror to unite the warring techno-barbarian tribes whilst crushing any opposition with the first iteration of his Marines, which were named as the Thunder Warriors. These were genetically enhanced super soldiers who, whilst brutally effective in battle, were prone to succumbing to the weight of their own gifts, resulting in huge swathes of his army falling into a state of disorganized madness, or to simply die at random. Because of this, they were not seen as being fit for the task of carrying mankind out through the stars, and so, as Terra was finally unified under a single banner, the Custodian Guard were tasked with hunting down and exterminating the Thunder Warriors, lest they remain as a stain upon all of humanity. In their place, the Emperor introduced the second iteration of his genetic warriors, and these would truly be the Space Marines, which we would all recognize even today. They were to be recruited from the existing population upon Terra, though they were now implanted with the fabled gift known as the Gene Seed, which bequeathed them with the essence of one of the 20 Primarchs, who themselves had been formed with the Emperor's own DNA. At this point, they were to be organized into the 20 Great Legions, who had each been created to serve a specific purpose, though primarily they would be expected to seize humanity's birthright and reunite the galaxy under the banner of all mankind. Now, those initial recruits had already proven themselves during the unification wars upon Terra, but as they set out into the void, it would be inevitable to expect losses at a truly unprecedented scale. As the Great Crusade progressed, the 20 legions would eventually claim their own home worlds, most often being from the planets upon which their own Primarch originally landed. Their hardy populace would then be drawn from to bring new aspirants into their legion, who would be imbued with their Primarch's gene seed, and trained until they could finally stand as a true-born Space Marine. In time, the actual culture of the legions would slowly diverge, partly due to their experiences and genetic flaws, but perhaps the largest shift occurred from the admittance of local recruits sourced from their new home world. As an example of this, let us look at the Dusk Raiders, who were later renamed by their Primarch, Mortarion, as the Death Guard. The recruits, who had lived out their brutal lives upon the death world of Barbarus, had been oppressed for most of their history by the malevolent Xenos species, known as the Overlords, and it was only due to their hard-fought revolution that granted them with freedom. Naturally, given that their collective memory was still deeply ingrained with the feelings of maltreatment, cruelty, and tyranny, meant that their recruits were far more dour and were generally more open towards facing death head-on, seeing the brutality of war as being yet another infallible truth behind life itself. Because Mortarion himself had been brought up upon this world, he naturally favored the Barbaran natives, and so, in time, the Terran recruits were almost entirely exterminated, being sent to their deaths in battle, purely to make way for the sons of Barbarus. This practice of replacing the Terran Marines with the chosen recruits of their homeworld was rather common amidst the 20 legions, and so the cultural practices and general attitudes towards life held upon the legion homeworlds blossomed forth to become the defining culture of the Marines. As the Horus Heresy came to its end, and as the Codex Astartes was introduced by Robert Guilliman, the surviving 9 legions were split into smaller chapters of around 1,000 Marines each, a framework which has persisted well into the 41st millennium today. So now, when a chapter is in need of new aspirants, they will typically look to the populace of their own home world, or they will designate a nearby planet as a recruitment world, which will similarly be drawn upon to find humans with the potential to arise as Marines. These planets can be of any type, though the Astartes will tend to choose either hive worlds or death worlds to recruit from. The reason behind this is that they will only select the hardiest of humans, who already hold the innate strength and constitution necessary to survive the transformation which they will soon endure. Thus, with a hive world boasting a population in the billions, we can be sure to find at least a handful of potential recruits, and they will typically be drawn from the hardy gangs of the Undercity, since they will have already lived a life of hardship and trial, making them excellent candidates for the Astartes. Similarly, upon a death world, each new day must be earned and wrangled from the elements, and this adversity is known to breed a form of strength most prized by the Marines. With that being said, it is not unheard of for a citizen upon an agri-world or cardinal world to be chosen, but we must remember that the Marines will need to actually witness and assess the human before they can be considered for recruitment. The actual practices for selecting new recruits will vary quite wildly between chapters, though it will most often involve some form of trial formulated so that the aspirant may prove themselves as being worthy of joining in with their ranks. For example, with the Space Wolves, they will solely recruit from the hardy native populace of Fenris, where it will be the responsibility of the wolf priests to locate and assess potential initiates. If they witness a Fenrisian to fight a glorious battle with a rival, or to heroically sacrifice themselves to save their brothers during a fierce hunt, then the priest will emerge from the snowy storms to pull them from certain death, granting them with the chance to live again within the ranks of the wolves. Other times, however, the wolf priest may infiltrate a small township or settlement and challenge the humans to a great contest of feasting, drinking, and fighting, which all will naturally participate in. Only the scant few who are able to display their strengths and durability will accompany the priest back to their fortress monastery, ready to prove themselves in further, ever more brutal trials. We will soon cover the other unique trials of the Space Wolves, but as another example of the Astartes' recruitment practices, let us look towards the Sons of Dawn in the Imperial Fists. Though their homeworld is officially recorded as being Holy Terror, they have chosen to remain as a fleet-based chapter, meaning that they will roam the stars aboard a colossal fortress monastery known as the Phalanx. They will recruit from dozens of worlds, including Terra itself, and of the hive world of Necromunda. But the Fists have been known to draw from near any world, if they so happen to spy a suitable aspirant. In any case, once selected, a human will be taken aboard the Phalanx, into the halls Martialis, where they will undergo a litany of physiological and psychological tests. Entire wings of the Phalanx are dedicated towards training the new recruits, but even if 1,000 promising aspirants are brought in, only a scant handful of them will be of a strong enough stock to bear the name of the Imperial Fists upon their pauldrons. We could endlessly speak on the unique methods or practices behind sourcing and recruiting baseline humans for an initiation, but I do believe that this will be a topic for another day. Moving away from the Sons of Dawn, I would like to make a quick point, which relates to the darker side of the Space Marines. Though they are still sworn to serve all of mankind, we would be remiss to not acknowledge that some of the Marine chapters have since abandoned much of their prior humanity, and thus feel very little in the way of compassion or empathy towards a baseline human. As a result of this, they will not tolerate any form of weakness from their new recruits, who will be forced to now prove that they are worthy enough of joining in with the ranks of the Astartes. Aspirants may be expected to commit acts of self-flagellation, endure trials of torture, fight within gladiatorial rings, slaughter alien prisoners, or to withstand a psychic onslaught from a sanctioned psyker. The Marines care not for the brutal losses incurred within their roster of recruits, since if they could not endure this early stage, then they would have never been able to survive the future tasks required of them. To be clear on this point, however, The majority of chapters will not wish to see their recruits dying during the process. And in fact, returning to the Imperial Fists, for example, any who fail to pass this stage of recruitment will still be permitted to join in the Auric Auxilia, a baseline human army who are stationed upon the phalanx. Regardless of how an aspirant is chosen, we must acknowledge that the new recruits will almost always be fairly young, typically being around the early stages of adolescence. This is due to the fact that the implanted organs, known as the gene seed, have been designed to respond to the natural hormonal signals of the recruit during this stage of their life. If an older recruit was selected, then their organs may simply fail to grow. And such is the rarity of the gene seed that the Marines will almost never see the risk as being worth it. Another consideration is that the minds of the recruits will need to be particularly susceptible to psycho-indoctrinations. This is necessary as some of the new organs will only fully develop after receiving a prolonged bout of hypnotic training. And so, if one cannot open their mind, then they will be seen as a failure, ill-fit to serve as a Marine. From the prior points of needing young adolescents, brought up in a harsh environment, with a susceptibility towards hypnosis, means that the actual recruiting pool for the Marines is incredibly low. Yet, the chapter will always find new initiates to join in with their ranks. And once a recruit has been chosen, then they can begin the arduous process of accepting the gifts of the gene seed. Before we begin, I will briefly explain what the gene seed actually is. It was originally formed by the Emperor prior to the Great Crusade, having been derived from the DNA of a specific Primarch, which will trigger a series of mutations and developmental changes within the host once implanted. A gene seed is not a singular element, and instead it will be administered in the form of 19 zygotes, single cells which will eventually grow into one of the specialized organs of the Astartes. Each organ is a tremendous accomplishment in the field of genomics and bioengineering, but their introduction into a host must be performed incredibly carefully, as they can often lead to the deaths of the recruit if they are unable to endure the ordeal. Also, they must be implanted in a specific order, since some of the organs will be dependent on the functioning of others, and so if one of these were to mutate or prematurely shut down, then the host could similarly fall. Interestingly, the various organs, though conserved throughout the ranks of the Marines, seem to be tailored towards the genetics of the aspirant, meaning that as they mature, that they will quickly work in tandem with the unique biochemistry of the recruit. I should note, however, that for some chapters, their gene seed will have mutated in such a way where certain organs are no longer functional, though in these cases, it is almost never a vitally important implant, and it will rarely impact their combat ability. Since the introduction of the Primaris Marines to the galaxy, the Archmagos Belisarius Call has developed 3 new zygotic implants, bringing the total number of gene seed organs to 22. We will soon cover these in more detail, but it is important to note that a firstborn Marine may retroactively receive these new implants by crossing the so-called Rubicon Primaris. This was once a rather dangerous procedure, but it has since been refined to the point where it is so safe that it will be rather rare for us to find any Marine who has not chosen to ascend. In addition, it seems as though the gene seed alterations within the Primaris Marines have also reduced the impact of some of the more maladaptive of mutations found throughout many of the chapters. For instance, all within the Blood Angels are cursed to one day fall into a state of madness known as the Black Rage, where they will believe themselves to be their Primarch Sanguinius, locked in his climactic duel with the arch-traitor Horus. A Primaris Marine may similarly succumb to this fate, though it has been noted that they are slightly more resistant than of the firstborn brothers. For now, however, I will ask you to sit back and relax, as it is now time for us to learn of each of the 22 gene seed organs, a segment which may take some time to complete. We will follow along in the order in which they are introduced, but it is important to note that after their initial implantation, that it will still take several years for each of the zygotes to fully mature into their final functional form. Because of this, some of the implant phases will overlap, meaning that an aspirant may receive several zygotic implants at the same time. And in these cases, the organs tend to grow and work in a synergistic fashion, improving and enhancing the functioning of the other. The first zygote will be placed in the right side of the aspirant's chest, which will then grow into a secondary heart. This will begin to beat in tandem with the recruit's primary heart, mainly as a means of boosting their circulation to ensure that they are constantly receiving an adequate blood supply. Also, if the primary heart is destroyed, then this second heart will take over, permitting them to still live, though with a slightly diminished physical capacity. We could speculate that this organ is introduced first, as the improvement in blood circulation will be utterly essential for supporting the addition of future organs, which will certainly require a healthy blood supply to properly function. The second is named as the osmodula, which will be placed neatly into the base of their brain, likely connecting to the major glands of the endocrine system. The reason I say this is that its primary function is to monitor and secrete hormones, which will cause the bones of the recruit to grow and strengthen to a truly impressive degree. The recruit, after receiving this zygote, will be administered with a ceramic-based chemical, which will be drawn into the growing bones, further improving their durability. Interestingly, the hormones released from this organ will cause the ribcage of the aspirant to widen, eventually fusing the ribs into a single solid shell. The third organ is the biscopea, which once placed into the chest cavity, will similarly act as an endocrine organ. It will continuously release hormones to stimulate muscle growth, not only to make the recruit far stronger than what could otherwise be achieved in a baseline human, but also to aid in the functioning of future organs. At this point, the unique organs of the Primaris Marines will be introduced. The first will be of the sinew coils, which just so happen to be the only implant which is purely cybernetic. Metallic cables will interlace themselves with the already thick connective tissues of the recruit, allowing them to fully utilize their growing strength without risking a disastrous tendon injury. After, another neural implant will be given, known as the Magnificat, which will secrete growth hormones to further promote systemic muscular and skeletal strengthening. It will also release signals to the previously implanted osmodula and biscopea, enhancing their function, prompting an even greater degree of bone and muscle growth. The final Primaris organ is the Belisarian furnace, which will nestle itself between the twin hearts of the aspirant. It will remain in a dormant state until it is triggered to action by a traumatic or stressful situation, at which point it will rapidly begin to release stimulants and regenerative compounds designed to keep the Marine alive, even if they are suffering from an otherwise mortal injury. Returning to the conventional gene seed organs of the Marines, the fourth phase of implants will introduce the hemastamen, which will be attached to one of their major blood vessels, such as the aorta. This organ will alter the makeup of the aspirant's red blood cells, increasing their hemoglobin count, making them far more efficient at transporting oxygen through the body. In addition, it will monitor and can even alter the functionality of the previous implants, ensuring that the hormone levels they release are kept within an acceptable level. The fifth implant will similarly find its home within the central chest cavity, and this will be known as the Larraman's organ. Once mature, it will be around the size of a golf ball, from which dozens of blood vessels will protrude outwards, forming a complex vascular web, connecting it to the greater circulatory system. The function of this organ is to produce Larraman cells, which will be rapidly released in response to any major or minor injury. Once at the wound site, they will quickly form a thick, scar-like layer, staunching any further blood loss, whilst also protecting the injured tissues from external contamination. Next will be the catalepsian node, which will be implanted into the brain via a small hole drilled through their occipital bone. This will alter their circadian rhythm, whilst also significantly dampening the negative effects brought about by sleep deprivation. This works by slowly reducing the activity of certain brain areas, while still allowing the Marine to remain alert and combat-ready, essentially meaning that they may partially sleep and rest their brains whilst still remaining awake for several days at a time. Make no mistake, however, for this is not true sleep, and in time, even the angels of death will need to retreat to their chambers for a good night of rest. The seventh phase of implants will introduce the large preomnor, which will join with the digestive system, growing out from their esophagus, forming something of a second stomach. According to our sources, no actual digestion takes place within this organ, and instead, it functions to detect and neutralize any toxins or poisons which may be present in their food. Essentially, this will allow the Marine to eat a far wider range of foods, which would otherwise be too dangerous for a baseline human to consume. If, however, they were to ingest something which was too toxic to neutralize, then the preomnor may close itself off from the rest of the digestive system, preventing that poisonous food from compromising the health of the Marine. Staying on the topic of digestion, the eighth phase introduces a curious zygote, named as the homophagia, into the spinal cord, which will eventually grow several protrusions, implanting themselves into the walls of the stomach. Once mature, it will permit the Marine to absorb the genetic memory of any creature they eat, thus meaning that they can learn about the tactics and habits of their foes by consuming their dead. The chapter known as the blood drinkers have a mutation within their gene seed, which results in a highly overactive homophagia, and this has led to their Marines to partake in ritualistic blood-consuming ceremonies as a means to sate their eternal hunger. Phase 9 brings about another implant to their chest cavity, this time introducing the so-called multi-lung. This will typically be inactive. However, when in the presence of a hazardous atmosphere, it will take over the functioning of the two natural lungs, protecting them from damage, while simultaneously filtering out the harmful compounds, allowing the Marine to continue to breathe. The oculobe will be implanted during the 10th phase, and this will grow upon the base of their brain. This organ is most curious, as it itself will not cause a significant change to the Marine, but rather its signals will alter the eyes of the aspirant in such a way that they will become receptive to the advanced optic therapies of the chapter. Essentially, what this means is that the technicians who oversee the creation of each Marine may adjust their eyes in order to provide them with a far sharper vision, where they may see further and even maintain their vision through low-light conditions. The 11th phase is also quite strange, as it will first involve the removal of the aspirant's ears and auditory organs, but these will then be replaced by the implant known as the liman's ear. This will mature rather quickly, but once fully grown, it will provide the Marine with the ability to filter out certain background sounds, allowing them to focus on and enhance specific noises. So, for example, they would be able to easily pick out someone's voice, even during a large battle. Also, the regrown vestibular system granted by this organ is far superior to that of a baseline human, meaning that the Marines will possess an impressive degree of balance, whilst also preventing them from becoming disoriented or dizzy. A rather intrusive surgery is required for the 12th phase, as it is here that the Suzanne membrane is implanted. The skull will be opened up to reveal the brain, at which point this new membrane will be blanketed over its surface, though we are not sure if this is placed above or below the meninges. But in any case, as it matures, it will fuse with the brain tissue, at which point the aspirant will need to master a series of training regimes before they can actually utilize the new organ. Once this is achieved, however, they will be able to enter into a state of suspended animation, where they will be able to remain in stasis for many years at a time, almost as if they were locked in hibernation. The Marine will not be able to wake themselves from this state, and they will require a senior apothecary to administer a potent cocktail of chemical stimulants, along with a psycho-indoctrination to spur them back into the land of the living. This all may seem quite strange, but if the Marine has received a mortal wound, then they may enter into this suspended state, granting their brothers with the opportunity to heal them and to potentially save their life. The 13th phase of implantations will introduce the melanchromic organ to the aspirant. It will passively sense the absorption of radiation through their skin, and if the levels become too dangerous, then it will trigger the release of melanin to darken their skin, protecting them from the hazardous rays. Though this is primarily based upon ultraviolet exposure, it will also provide a limited degree of protection against harsher, more ionizing forms of radiation. This organ does not function as intended in several chapters, and as an example of this, when we look at the death spectres, we will see that they are made up almost entirely of albinos, their skin entirely bereft of pigment. The 14th phase brings about the implantation of the oolitic kidney, which once fully grown will filter the aspirant's blood, supporting the two natural kidneys which will begin to struggle with the increased demands of their bio-enhanced body. If a Marine is overexposed to poisons or harmful chemicals, then their body may temporarily shut down, at which point the oolitic kidney and secondary heart will be stimulated to rapidly increase their circulation in order to filter the blood and decontaminate the Marine. Next, we have the neuroglottis, which will be implanted just at the rear of their mouth. And once mature, it will enable the aspirant to detect toxins or poisons just from their enhanced sense of taste. Interestingly, some Marines have been known to track and trace a target just by following the distinctive odors and pheromone trails, which are only detectable thanks to this organ. For the 16th phase, the mucranoid will be introduced to the lower intestine, which will eventually produce a secretion which alters the function of the aspirant's sweat glands. However, this change must be activated by a specific course of chemotherapy. Essentially, this will alter the sweat of the recruit, now making it into a waxy secretion, which can seal off their skin in a protective sheath, helping them to withstand extreme fluctuations in temperature and even short exposures to a vacuum. Phase 17 will involve the implantation of 2 zygotic organs into their mouth, and these are known as the Betcher's glands. They will produce and store an incredibly potent poison, which can be spat out at a target, potentially blinding or incapacitating them. The poison is also impressively acidic, and so, if trapped behind bars, the Marine could theoretically chew through the metal cage, though it would likely take them a rather long time. Next, we have what is undoubtedly the most precious organ of the gene seed, and it will be during the 18th phase that the aspirant is granted with their progenoids. These are a paired set of glands, one to be placed within their neck and the other deep within their chest. Over the course of the recruit's life and service to the chapter, the progenoids will be stimulated by the previously implanted organs, prompting them to produce new germ cells, which may be implanted into a new initiate, elevating them from a human into a Marine. The glands will mature at different rates, with the neck finishing after 5 years and the chest after 10. Once they have been extracted, they will be stored in the sacred vaults of the chapter, and in time, they will be used to transform future human recruits into true-born Astartes. This remains as the only method for producing new gene seed implants. And so, we can begin to understand that if a chapter loses a significant portion of their brothers, or if their fortress monastery is destroyed, then they may struggle to replenish their ranks without outside aid. I will quickly note that each chapter is required to send a portion of their gene seed back to Terra, and this can be used during a founding to produce an entirely new chapter, or to resurrect another if they had been brought to the brink of extinction. On this point, if a brother dies in battle, then it is vitally important for an apothecary to recover their progenoids, as even in death, they will be able to give up a part of themselves, which will eventually be used to create a new Marine. The final phase of the creation of a Marine will involve the implantation of a material known as the black carapace. Their skin will be peeled away in large sheets, at which point slabs of the carapace will be inserted and fitted before the skin is unfurled and stitched back together. From here, it will grow downwards, sending out a spiraling projection of nerve bundles, which will connect the various sensory organs of the Marine to a series of interface points, now sticking out through their skin. This will allow the Marine to connect themselves to their power armor, granting them with the intuitive ability to feel their suit almost as if it was an extension of themselves. I should mention that without this carapace, that the Marine will not actually be able to use their power armor, as the suit will only properly function if it receives the appropriate stimuli sent via the connection ports. In addition to all this, over time, the black carapace will harden, and once it is finally mature, it can almost be seen as an incredibly light layer of subdermal armor. At this point, the aspirant will now have the internal biology of a true space marine, and they will now be prepared to arise as a battle brother to their chapter, ready to bring the fury of the Emperor across the vast expanse of our galaxy. This is only the basic path that every Marine will take, and some chapters will introduce their own gene seed organs to their recruits, such as with the Canis helix of the Space Wolves. But I believe that this portion of our sermon has gone on long enough, and so that topic will be kept for another day. As the aspirant is augmented and transformed by the sacred gene seed, they will be plunged into a relentless training regime designed to hone their mind, body, and soul for the unimaginable horrors which they will inevitably face in their service to all mankind. This process is not merely physical, and the demands will place a heavy burden upon the aspirant's very soul, but it is only from this torturous experience that a true Marine may be forged. As the recruit grows older, and as their gene seed organs mature, they will be required to provably demonstrate that they can appropriately utilize the sacred gifts of the chapter. As I mentioned previously, not all aspirants will find their bodies to accept the zygotic organs, and yet, even a successful candidate, if untrained, will be just as useless as one who has fallen into a state of gibbering madness. Thus, the Marines will need to mold the new recruit by providing them with the necessary physical and mental challenges designed to reshape the human into an Astartes. Beginning with the body, the aspirants will be subjected to a punishing series of physical trials meant to push them far beyond the absolute breaking point of a human. Some of these will be designed for strength, where recruits will be pitted against each other in sparring matches, though for some chapters it is not uncommon for the aspirants to die during their fights. For instance, with the Iron Hands, their initiates are encouraged to brawl with one another, with conventional training programs being halted, just to instigate brutal duels to the death between rival recruits. But a Marine must not only be strong, as they will also need to train and prove that they can endure the harshest of environments found out in the distant galaxy. Thus, they will be ordered to partake in trials of endurance where, most commonly, the recruit will be dropped into a near inhospitable realm, bereft of equipment from where they must conquer the elements and somehow survive. The Imperium is dotted with death worlds, which will often be used for such trials, though, as we must remember, many of the Space Marine recruits will often have been sourced from such planets, and so they would likely have an innate advantage during such challenges. As an example of this, however, let us look once more to the Space Wolves, where their recruits will need to pass the so-called Test of Morkai. The lone aspirant will be stripped of their equipment and expelled into the frigid wilderness of Fenris, at which point they will be expected to navigate the hostile ice fields, avoiding the many natural and unnatural dangers of this world, to find their way back to the fortress monastery of the Fang. It is not unheard of for some recruits to be stolen away by predatory beasts, as the abominable failures of the Wulfen are known to stalk the snow dunes. But if they are indeed successful in rejoining their kin, then they will be embraced as a true brother, who has now proven himself as being strong enough to uphold the legacy of Russ. This practice of exposing a recruit to the harsh elements is incredibly common within the Space Marine chapters, since it will naturally favor the strongest and most capable of their kind, whilst leaving the weak to simply die in cold isolation. With that being said, however, even in death, one may still serve the chapter. Within the Ultramarines, for instance, their trials of endurance are known to leave many recruits with mortal injuries, but those failures will still be recovered by the chapter, only to be transformed into aspirant servitors, intended to carry out menial tasks for the Marines. The Space Wolves similarly hold a rather dark practice for their failed recruits. The children of Fenris hold no compassion for those who have fallen during their trials, and in fact, they see their failures as being a direct insult to their mythological figures, thus meaning that the dead will need to atone for their sins. Each fallen recruit will be dragged into the dungeons of the Fang to be transfigured into a thrall servitor, their minds wiped and forced to be entirely subservient to the directives of an iron priest. They will then be deployed into battle as common fodder, with the sole expectation that they will one day die in service, redeeming their souls for wasting the time and resources of the wolves. As with most practices, the various chapters will hold their own expectations for what counts as a failure or a success. For instance, the White Scars will order for the recruits of Chogoris to dive into the frigid waters of the Tovgoshen, plumbing the depths, to recover a fabled horn from one of the mighty Oriovar whales. But physical endurance is only one part of a Space Marine's transformation, and equally critical is the mental conditioning the aspirant undergoes. They are taught to suppress fear, to channel pain into rage, and to approach the chaos of war with a sense of cold precision, often abandoning their notions of humanity, replaced instead with a sense of brutal pragmatism. This mental fortitude is developed partially from the aforementioned trials of endurance, but also from exposing the aspirant to simulated battles, where they will be pitted against horrific images of the Xenos and heretics who have come to plague our stars. Further still, recruits are to be trained in the arts of strategy and warfare, as each Marine will be expected to act not only as a warrior, but also as a tactician. They are to be educated in the doctrines of the Codex Astartes and of the unique battle plans of their chapter, learning of how to adapt to a shifting war zone and of when they may be expected to take the initiative, to one day lead in a strike force themselves. At this point, however, I must mention that the tests and training regimes of the Marines will not only be based upon their physical abilities, as they will also be expected to fully immerse themselves into their chapter's culture. Returning to the White Scars, for instance, their Marines are well known for their philosophical and artistic practices, and so a recruit will eventually hone their skills in some rather unexpected pursuits, such as poetry, art, or even traditional Chogoran throat singing. I previously mentioned that many of the gene seed organs will require hazardous chemical treatments in order to be activated, and this can be so dangerous that many aspirants will simply die from the sudden exposure. This can be considered as yet another part of their trials of endurance, and it is one which all must be able to conquer, for how can a Marine be expected to defend all of humanity if they cannot even survive but a simple poison? Beyond chemical therapies, the aspirant must also be trained in how to sense and control their newly implanted organs. There are many ways to do this, but one of the most common will be to hypnotize the recruit before subconsciously guiding their focus towards the specific organ. In practice, the aspirant will be placed in a deeply hypnotic state, hovering just between consciousness and the eternal void, wherein which they will become highly receptive to external suggestions. Whilst within this trance-like state, an apothecary will introduce a toxic compound into their system, allowing the recruit to experience and familiarize themselves with the deathly sensation of being poisoned. As the fatal compound courses through their body, the apothecary will guide the recruit, using their hypnotic influence to instruct them on how to consciously activate both their secondary heart and oolitic kidney. This action will greatly boost their circulation, forcing the tainted blood to pass through the new kidney, rapidly neutralizing the poisonous compound and detoxifying their body. Most of their new organs, save for those which act in a more passive nature, will need to be trained in this manner, For it is not enough to possess these superior bioengineered systems, as the aspirant must also be able to instinctively command their functions during the heat of battle. Interestingly, the oculobe, catalepsian node, and Sussen membrane can only fully mature whilst under this hypnotic state, and so when a recruit is first found, they will be screened to ensure that they are indeed susceptible to hypnosis. If an aspirant was particularly resistant to such techniques, then these organs would fail to properly develop, resulting in the chapter producing a Marine who was less able than their brothers, which the Astartes would never willingly allow. Though these three organs may seem quite insignificant when compared to the others, we must remember that the process of creating a Marine was formed by the Emperor himself, and so to go against his design would be tantamount to heresy. In addition, many of the organs will rely upon each other for signaling, and so if any one implant fails to fully develop, then it may throw their metabolic or hormonal profiles into a state of disarray. This can violently cascade to the point where the aspirant will collapse as a broken heap, their bodies unable to support the genomic weight rapidly growing inside of them. Similarly, some will be unable to bear the mental pressures of their initiation, prompting them to lash out in a maddened attack upon their future brothers, a crime to which death is the only possible sentence. But in any case, once they have received their final implant and succeeded in their training, then they will be inducted into the chapter, no longer as an aspirant, but as a fully fledged battle brother of the Adeptus Astartes. They will then typically join in the ranks of the Scouts, where they will need to further prove themselves as being capable warriors, and only once they have walked as death incarnate will they be permitted to don their first suits of power armor and stand as a true-born Space Marine. For over 10,000 years, the Adeptus Astartes have stood vigil over the stars, safeguarding all of mankind from the myriad horrors which forever lurk within the dark, long-forgotten corners of our galaxy. Time and time again, they have been the final bulwark against our many enemies, and though some will fall in the face of duty, as we have investigated today, it is not impossible for them to recruit and train new brothers to join in their ranks. In some of our other sermons, we covered the chapter of the exorcists, with a particular focus on their recruitment, since they have a truly fascinating practice in which they forcibly possess their aspirants with demonic spirits as a means to make them more proficient at combating the dark powers of the warp. Similarly, when we looked at the death spectres who patrol the ghoul stars, we learnt of how their recruits are forced to die and resurrect themselves before they can be entrusted with carrying out the often nefarious missions of the chapter. The reason I bring these up is that there are over 1,000 chapters of the Marines which exist in the galaxy, and each of them will possess their own unique practices when it comes to recruitment and training. Thus, in time, we will cover some of the other, more interesting of chapters and learn of their many dark secrets. But from our sermon today, I hope that the actual practice of creating a Space Marine has become a little clearer. But in any case, with this, I do believe that we have now come to our end. Thank you all for listening to this investigation in its entirety. But for now, my dearest friends, I must once again close this chapter, and so I will wish you all with a warm goodbye.